Qiutian considered himself the greatest genius of all time. He was confident that he could cope with any obstacle that would stand in front of him. Relaxed from constant victories, the young man stopped even thinking about failure. He was sure that no one could throw him off this Olympus. Reality turned out to be cruel. When trying to ascend, something went wrong and Qiutian began to slowly die. Even the totem of immortality could not protect him from this fate. Falling down, the boy could not believe what had happened, how someone like him could die due to failure when trying to get into the world of immortals. But before Qiutian was completely erased from this world, Hitogami from the reincarnation of the unemployed appeared in front of him to console him, because the failure was not the guy's fault. Even though what happened was a consequence of the act of a divine entity, she offered the young genius to be transported to another world, where he could achieve much more. According to God, that world was still different from the rest, because a completely different spiritual art was practiced there, allowing one to become a witcher without special rituals and potions. But despite the strength that the young man can comprehend, his presence and the benefits he brings will hardly please people. He will become a real outcast. His only hope will be the words of his comrades, as well as reliable and strong coconuts, which he can observe even without visiting the market basket. A new girlfriend will not be able to replace the young man's games about Zelda. He will still be happy, as God told him long ago. Before all this happens, and while the youth's homeworld is still not calm, people are indignant because the Jueyan sect, which has become the strongest, has continued to gain momentum. People could not believe that the son of the clan head was able to reach and practically complete the body forging stage at such a young age. It was generally accepted that the main character was the strongest and most talented since the founding of the sect. No one could even compete with him. Not everyone could ascend. The elder sisters prayed for Qiutian. It only took him 20 years of training to reach this level. Above one of the highest mountains of their world, there was a huge storm of spiritual energy, almost the same crater that was in Half-Life 2 after the destruction of the Citadel. Continuing to concentrate a huge amount of energy, in order for the awakening to be completed completely, it was necessary to wait for 9 lightning strikes. As soon as the special spiritual vessel was hit with 8 blows in a row, the main character finally relaxed because everything was too easy for him. Qiutian would like this ritual to be more difficult than he thinks, but while everything said otherwise, he even began to yawn out of boredom. The final lightning strike did not take long to arrive, but this was still not the end. He had to carry out a ritual of concluding a pact with the spirit, then he could become the Shaman King. As soon as the boy started preparing, another blow happened. Its power was higher than all the previous ones, and this was a real rarity. The residents were very frightened, and the sisters were worried about the health of the protagonist, because he was always careless and probably after the 9th lightning completely removed his protection. The mountain began to split into several parts, as if an awakening volcano. If the volley were even stronger, a catastrophe on the level of a second strike from Evangelion could have occurred. As was destined after the failure, an avatar of God appeared in front of Qiutian. He asked for forgiveness for his mistake, but such an answer clearly did not suit the main character. Qian was unable to release the spiritual weapon and show why the gods should not have underestimated people and started Ragnarok. They were already outside the boundaries of the young man's native dimension. Then the hot-tempered young man wanted to use his fists. It was not in vain that he trained throughout almost his entire life, but this attempt was unsuccessful. The main character didn't plan to give up so easily, so he decided to use the Dempsey Punch, the main character's signature move from his favorite boxing manga. However, even drawing a figure 8 in the air, the guy could not reach God with his fist. The creator suggested that Qian simply give up and listen to his proposal. The entity did not try to deny its guilt, but instead of moving the guy to another world with a smartphone, God wanted to provide the main character with a slightly different service. Even though many centuries ago God was the same mortal, who nevertheless managed to go through the rite of initiation into immortals and ascend, he did not lose his compassion. As an apology, the kid wanted to get a return ticket from this parody of Muten Roshi from Dragon Ball. Only the problem was that God could do absolutely anything except that. This was impossible, since Qiutian died completely in his world, which means he would not be able to return home no matter how much he wanted to. Even though the creator understood the feelings of the young guy, there were still so many big melons left in that world that he never managed to appreciate. The proposal to go to conquer another world sounded good, but it didn't make much sense because all the strength accumulated over a lifetime would disappear without a trace. After thinking a little, God agreed to leave all the young man's powers, but he was not allowed to choose the world of his favorite manhwa, and besides, the creator had already prepared a suitable option. Before the main character could express his opinion, he was pulled into an unknown direction, and the divine entity only wished him good luck in new adventures. Since it was a transfer, the young man's appearance, his clothes, and things were preserved. Only the landing promised not to be soft. The god of their world was not as kind as Theta from No Game, No Life. In order not to fly into pieces, Chu Qian had to group himself in time and flight. This was not easy to do, but in the end he remained intact. Immediately, the young man was drawn into a battle with the deer cyclops from Don't Starve. The villagers barely held him at the entrance to their settlement. This winter turned out to be extremely difficult for them. Satisfied that God had not deceived him, the main character decided to immediately test his strength on this monster. His spiritual sword was summoned as simply as in his home world. The monster was not going to ignore the new participant in the battle, so he immediately attacked the young man, but Chang's speed was enough to successfully dodge. Summoning 10,000 swords of the broken moon, the main character easily destroyed the demon. The effect was about the same as using Zenith from Terraria. Personally, I would also be shocked, to put it mildly, if some guy in strange clothes fell from the sky and killed a huge monster with one blow, so the reaction of the residents is realistic. They were unable to pay the savior with minted coin, but the boy did not understand what was going on, even though the nickname seemed very cool to him. In this world, witchers were everyone who hunts monsters professionally. From childhood, these warriors undergo rigorous training to develop strength. Having decided to actually become a witcher, the guy went to the nearest tavern not to play Gwent, but to collect new orders for murder. He liked one order, excellent payment and simple execution, but an unfamiliar girl also grabbed the same piece of paper. However, only the main character considered this task simple. The beauty tried to warn him. This 100-year-old quest was too much for even Gildarts from Fairy Tale. The girl was an experienced warrior, but the young man took this order because the conditions suited him, and besides, he is now a witcher, which means he must work hard. The monster was even more dangerous than the Ten Tails from Naruto, so despite the confident answer, the stranger continued to persuade Qian to abandon this idea. Noticing that the beauty was about to cry, the guy decided to offer to create a party to complete the task. He was even ready to share the reward. But considering that the main character was not worthy to be called a monster hunter, the blonde pulled out a weapon and attacked him, trying to kill him. Even though Chu Tian was able to stop her blade with 2 fingers, she couldn't believe that someone like him could become a true demon slayer. Realizing how strong the boy was, the adventurer had no choice but to accept the offer and keep company. When transferring the main character, God helped him learn the language, but Qian could only communicate in it. Writing or reading was impossible for him. The location in which they were reminiscent of Riverwood from Skyrim, a place where many travelers stopped. Their journey took a lot of time. The wife of one of the locals disappeared near the river, but no one noticed anything. All that was left of her was a laundry tub and some blood. It was this quest that the guys had to complete, while at first glance the only suspect could be Makama with her special technique. The main characters group wanted to get some additional information, only the man did not want to talk. Everything known was indicated on the sheet itself. To continue the investigation, they wanted to find out more about the place where the disappearance happened. But before going after the resident, the girl asked Qian not to react to the words of the locals. The other settlers were not happy with the man's initiative. Witchers were considered no better than the monsters they kill, so no one liked to attract them. The elder was also dissatisfied with the decision to bring such people into their usually peaceful settlement. Usually they were called only in extreme cases, such as to kill the false Hydra or Roshan. Only the man had nothing to lose. He wanted fair revenge for the monster who killed his wife, and the Witchers were the only ones who could provide such a service. There was only one wish that the resident wanted to fulfill before taking the next step, so he was even ready to be expelled. The locals began to whisper. No one wanted to see such wanderers near their home. The people of this world even had a sign that seeing the Witcher meant grief. The reaction of the main character revealed that he was an imposter. He did not understand why those who help were treated this way, but his companion only said that this was the custom here. But despite the transformations that all hunters go through, according to the young man, they should not be subjected to such hatred. The young man wanted even more to continue the road and deal with this order. Like Satoru Gojo after Riki's death, he was thinking about destroying the settlement afterward, but realized that he would not solve the problem that way. Because of their training, real witchers can see perfectly in the dark and in muddy water, so the investigation could take place anywhere and regardless of the time of day. The girl was sure that the imposter was not capable of such a thing, but he also had an ace up his sleeve. His third eye coped with this task perfectly. Their duo was not as efficient and organized as Hero and Zero Two when working, but they still managed to attack some leads. The smell of the monster also swirled in the air. Its source was the river, so the blonde assumed that they were dealing with a drowned man. The main character's powers were different from those the girl had seen before, even though she had previously worked with many hunters. Determining the type and location of the monsters turned out to be not such a problem. Thanks to the arts of spiritual energy, Chu Tian could become an e-sportsman in Phasmophobia. Using techniques learned in the past world, like a real witcher, the main character could hear sounds that the ears of ordinary people were not able to perceive. Due to the impact of enormous energy, the monster soon crawled out of its hiding place to get a few more portions of food. In addition to unusual abilities, the Witcher's strength and endurance are enough to overcome all the films from the Lord of the Rings series in one go. But Chuken was beyond this mark of strength, because his techniques and knowledge were not available to ordinary mortals. After all, earlier he had practically become a god. Even though the young man called himself a witcher, in the blonde's opinion he was more like some kind of magician, because monster hunters used weapons. But even though the guy was similar in strength to Sinestro from Green Lantern, one blow was not enough to kill the water monster. Since the young man had no experience in fighting these creatures, he used the wrong tactics against them. To compensate for this, he decided to invest more power. Having awakened more power, the guy was easily able to prepare fish cutlets from the monster for Odin, according to a recipe from Wano. Only due to the high activity, other creatures nearby also appeared. From different sides, the blonde was surrounded by 6 similar monsters at once, but Chu Tian only continued to get bored from the number of additional targets. It was not a problem for him to defeat 100 of them at once. The strength of the main character went beyond the understanding of his partner. She could not understand who the guy really was. Now the words that he was actually a witcher seemed less nonsense. The beauty wanted to ask to become a student because her techniques were not so cool. Of course, the young man always dreamed of a student, because he wanted to pass on his skills, but the inhabitants of this world could not adopt his techniques. But despite this, Chu Tian began to take a closer look at his companion, because she had the makings of becoming immortal if she learned a little. He saw a special energy inside the girl, but it was not the same as his. The location of spiritual points in the beauty's body was more typical for followers of Khotun. After thinking a little, the guy finally accepted the blonde as a student, but immediately warned that he did not guarantee results and would have to work harder than she could imagine. Only the main character did not understand why the Witcher needed this, because she has enough strength for a quiet life in this world, but she did not agree with it. Her goal was to eradicate hatred towards all representatives of her profession, so she would have to travel a lot of time and defeat dangerous monsters. The young man asked if the blonde was going to found a sect of witchers. They had Kair Morhen and other schools in their world, but she did not understand the exact meaning of the future mentor's words. Her main goal was to at least begin to change the world, to create a settlement or an entire huge city in which hunters of evil could live peacefully without fear. But the blonde did not have enough strength to realize such a goal. She understood this very well, so one of the goals of her journey was to gain new strength. The guy introduced himself. He believed that building his kingdom was not such a great thing. He was ready to train the girl in exchange for information. The girl's name was Danielle Klend. She studied at Fox School, but Chu Tian was unable to remember such a long name, so he decided to simply call her Danielle. But mysterious forces were already closely watching the main character. He fell from the sky and dealt with a strong monster. Many of the inhabitants of this world would not have been able to cope with this. The sorceress monitoring everything turned out to be a woman very similar to Mona from Genshin. She had never met such masters, or at least had not studied their library of spells. There were many strong sorceresses sitting at the table. They were not particularly interested in how rich her experience in communicating with ice was, but they could not ignore the presence of such a strong person. Even though their organization was considered very powerful, they would have been difficult to cope with the ancient spirit of the deer in 4-5, provided that the best of the best took part. These witches knew a lot about those transported from another world. If the guy turned out to be one of these, he would cause them a lot of problems. Then one of the girls suggested simply killing him. Next, we are transferred to a city of people located in the Duchy of Shell. The place in which they were located was the capital, a small port town. As the young man had previously assumed, none of the local residents were able to use spiritual powers. There was something different in these people, some kind of incomprehensible power. Danielle was very angry because Chu Tian constantly ignored her. He was interested in how to translate the name of the town. In their language, it meant shells. Examining the shell of one of the mollusks, the guy was interested in why they came here in the first place, because they could travel further and learn about power. True, the blonde has already talked about this. Unlike the young man, she cannot meditate and saturate herself with this, so they arrived in the city to get money for food. As always, the main character attracted bad luck, so soon after their arrival, the sea people began attacking the inhabitants of the earth. Even the Sea King was with them. The guy's ability to move was the same as Omen from Valorant, so by creating a dark sphere at the transfer site, after a couple of seconds he found himself in its place. From the top of the house, all the opponents were clearly visible. There were only a few of them. But unlike those he had killed in the village earlier, these were armed. Murlocs did not often leave their usual habitat. Danielle warned how dangerous their attacks could be for unprepared people. In their world, unfortunately, there was no Murloc killer, who had the highest rank and took tasks only to clean up the inhabitants of the depths, so the main character undertook to exterminate them. But according to her partner, an ordinary blade is not capable of injuring Murlocs. In order to harm them, all Witchers use special oil from the Corpse Eater. Only to kill these monsters, the guy did not need anything. His sword could hardly be called ordinary. Not happy with the outcome, Daniela complained about the guy because it was impossible to cut down so many Murlocs without oil while keeping his sword. The guy, in her opinion, was a real cheater. Not everyone was pleased with the young man's feat. Soon the regular army of the duchy appeared. They were even more severe than the Jomsvikings from the Vinland saga. The young man had no experience in such situations, so he did not understand what business the soldiers could have in relation to them. One of the soldiers came forward, introducing himself as Clifford. He was the bodyguard of the Prince of Questmerland. He was also called Cliffman. Based on the reaction of the main character, the leader of the army suggested that he was not local because it was forbidden to use magic on their territory. Since Chu-Tian had gone overboard in defending the city, the army was well aware of how difficult it would be to oppose the stranger, but they had a request. The prince was faced with certain problems. If the guys agreed to help with their solutions, the government would forget about violating the ban and pay a reward for their help. Hearing the sound of jingling coins like a real witcher, the blonde began to insist that the guy agree. He was not very interested in this. When the size of the reward was announced, the girl's eyes began to shine as brightly as lanterns. She was already planning to buy herself new equipment and a portable Nintendo console with this money. Realizing that if he refused, his ally would kill him one night, Chen decided to fulfill the ruler's request. The only heir suffered from a serious illness since childhood. Kiaru with his healing magic was not in this world, so it was not possible to cure him. Gribble could not even move during the day. It was difficult for him to speak or even raise his hands, so there were always servants next to him. Since the young man was the firstborn of the Duke and the only child at the moment, the man could not stop taking care of him, so he was looking for different options. But the problem was that everyone who stayed with local Griffith overnight was found dead in the morning, and there was blood on the prince's hands. After some time, they managed to get to the Duke's castle. Its size was truly amazing. In the young man's past world, almost no one used stone for construction. Before entering, everyone had to surrender their weapons. This was a uniform rule for all outside visitors. His girlfriend didn't want to give up the rapier, so using a bag like Hermione Granger's, he easily hid the weapon. No one really understood what happened, because all attention was focused on the fruits developing from the created wind. But now the condition for entry was fulfilled. Then introducing himself again, the man officially admitted that he was the ruler of the Duchy of Shell, again asking to save his son from this terrible curse. As before, the main character accepted the offer, asking the man to quickly take them to the patient so that they could find out whether they could provide the necessary help. The Witcher decided to conduct the analysis first, since they are always on the go, and during their training many study healing techniques and practices. To check what the problem was, the guys decided to stay overnight and see for themselves who exactly was gaining control over the young man's body. Even if without much desire, the ruler of the duchy accepted the offer. They did not have to wait so long because it was already getting dark. While the main character meditated and restored his energy, the girl ate food from the most skilled chefs in the city. Their dishes were tastier than the Burger King that had recently opened in the country. When the time passed midnight, Gribble's eyes began to glow. He stood up sharply and was ready to pounce on them at any second. After a few more moments, the young man's body began to transform. Initially, the head was transformed, and then the fur began to spread to other areas. Meeting a werewolf was unexpected, but the guy assumed that he ate his real son and continued to pretend to be him, so he planned to use the deadly shinobi technique. However, Daniela managed to stop her friend, because the Duke's son himself was a werewolf, which means it was important to keep him alive. It was difficult to figure out what to do with him in this case, but perhaps the next time Mr. Beast decides to find a home for 100 shelter dogs, he will find a new home for this good boy. Since killing was not an option, the main character decided to chain the monster and keep him in this state until the morning. The young man was not familiar with the theory, so he asked his friend to enlighten him on this issue. According to her, there are several types of shape-shifting and lycanthropy is one of them. Becoming a werewolf is not so easy. Either it is a hereditary disease or it is a curse that someone cast. The girl assumed that this was the second option. There were only 4 options to become human forever. The first required sewing a shirt from parsley, but they didn't have it. The second required a special potion. The problem was that only an experienced alchemist such as Edward Elric could cook this, but he went in search of the Philosopher's Stone, and the girl doesn't know any others. The third method was the simplest. You needed a person who sincerely loves and cares for the damned, but Gribble's beloved died on the first night. The last option available to them was to search for a special item, such as a phylactery, in which the liches hid their souls so as not to die. If this item is broken or cleaned, then the curse will be lifted. But finding the culprit and then identifying the necessary item was not an easy task. The thoughts lasted until the morning, after all. They were talking about a noble family, and anyone could wish them death. It could even be one of the relatives or servants. Soon after, the prince fell asleep again, and the princess who could have awakened him with a kiss never came. The main character and his girlfriend left the room. The ruler of the lands asked to quickly tell about what the Witchers managed to find out, because previously no one had managed to come out alive. Having learned what exactly he had to face, the Duke wondered if there were any ways to help Gribble get rid of this illness. It seems to me easier to actually make contact with aliens than to find a literally unknown object that could be anything. But even the father could not imagine who could do this to his son, because previously the young man had always been honest and friendly, treating everyone well. The guys would not be surprised if the following qualities were added to the characteristics: quiet, calm, unsociable. Then the combo would be complete. Then, after thinking a little, the ruler suggested that they wanted to harm not Gribble himself, but his father, because the Duke had many haters. It will not be easy to find out which of these many enemies will be guilty of the incident. Then the young man remembered Elon Musk's trick to find out who was leaking information to the company. Finding the traitor will be easy if they pretend to be happy for the prince, telling everyone that he finally managed to overcome the curse. And if we take into account that incident at the port and the invitation of 2 witchers to the castle, it will not be difficult for a criminal to believe such a story. When the one who should hear about this news, he will definitely give himself away, trying to hide or, on the contrary, finish what he started. The guy was glad that he read the detective stories that they were given for the summer. At least the main character himself was sure of this, only his partner did not agree with such methods. In addition, Qiutian completely forgot that to remove lycanthropy, it is not enough to simply kill the caster, they had to destroy the crystal. The Duke did not mind showing his acting skills, feigning joy everywhere. He hoped that thanks to this his son would finally wake up. In addition, people subject to the curse of conversion lose memories of the times when they were subjugated by the Force, so they do not even have to seek a psychologist. This outcome was more than satisfactory for the ruler of Shell, because he would finally be able to spend time with his son, and he would not succumb to anger, like the hero of the shield, and would not harm others. Their plan included several stages, so the guys continued to live in the palace now they had free time, which the girl decided to spend on training. The girl previously agreed to work harder than MAPPA studio employees after they were told what titles they would be working on in the new year. True, even so, her strength was hardly enough for training, and she was very worried about how their plan to lure out the criminal would go. The essence of the plan was that the spellcaster would not turn to the Duke himself, but would come to them to come to an agreement. After all, they want to heal the prince because of the reward. In other words, the medieval Moriarty, who is weaving his intrigues in the duchy, can simply turn to them with a lucrative offer, hoping that he will not be interfered with. The plan worked like clockwork, so the unknown person in the mask had already appeared. They were specially training in a visible place. The young man had already prepared his equipment for the fight. As planned, the bad guy took the bait. He realized that the ruler's joy was just a game to lure him out, so he came to negotiate. Before concluding any deals, Qiutian decided to check who they were dealing with. His technique was easily able to throw off all the stranger's equipment. The plot turned as if we were not reading a manhwa, but watching another episode of Scooby-Doo, because the prince himself was hiding under the mask of a criminal. As it turned out, the young man himself turned himself into a werewolf, and therefore decided to talk to the Witchers personally so that they would not interfere with him. Even though his action made some sense to the blonde himself, from the outside it looked as if he had simply messed up during a magical experiment and was now trying to justify himself. According to the guys, no normal person would curse himself in order to gain such power. Kurapika from Hunter x Hunter would not agree with them. Daniela turned to the prince and wanted to know about his motives because of his decision, he doomed many people to death, including his loved ones. But the young man did not plan to share his personal experiences. After all, there were mercenaries in front of him, ready to do any work for a good pay, which is why he came. However, the main character was not one of those who judge a book by its cover, so he decided to carefully understand everything in order to make the right decision later. Using the chain technique again, the young man planned to grab the prince and then get the answers he needed, but Gribble was able to evade the technique. Even if the guy didn't keep his death list, saying the phrase, "this trick won't work twice," would definitely be one of the 100 things to do. But Qiutian was also no slouch because he quickly drew conclusions from this situation, and also added that his technique was not so simple that someone like a prince could bypass it. A few moments later, the blonde was already completely chained. Even his increased characteristics due to the curse did not help in this battle. Realizing how stubborn the prince was, the young man wanted to delve into his soul, like some mojito, but remembered in time that such a procedure was not very compatible with life. Then he decided to pull thoughts out of the boy's head with the help of dreams. He could find the necessary fragment, even if this was a more difficult technique. A few moments later, the young man fell into a lethargic sleep, and memories began to play above his head as if they were watching television. In the guy's memories, he could see how he confessed his love to a representative of the elf race. Dating someone who lived so little was not in her principles. The young man was ready to do anything for his beloved, but the elf reminded Gribble that he already had an official bride. In order not to try to dissuade the young man from his stupid idea, the beauty simply put him to sleep using a spell, and then planned to send him home. When he fell asleep, the girl called him not particularly handsome. In her opinion, his appearance could not even reach the level of a werewolf. I don't understand why the main character was unhappy. The guy definitely chose the right reference point. A wealthy woman with eternal youth and beauty. Soon the ruler of these lands came out into the street and could not understand what was happening at all, because his son, who could not move during the day, was under the sun, after which the main character asked him to just watch what was happening above, because they had almost reached the most interesting part. Soon after returning home, the boy decided to put a curse on himself in order to reach at least the level of a werewolf. He believed that then the elf would date him. After accidentally killing several people, Gribble decided to pretend to be sick and continue killing others until he found the same girl. During the transformation, the young man's body resembled the appearance of Vanitas, the blue moon vampire. But the prince's eyes were filled with anger. Turning to the ruler of the duchy, the main character reminded him of how he had previously called his son honest and friendly. The guys wanted to leave, leaving the solution to this situation to the duke himself, but the man turned to the Witchers, reminding them that they were exterminating monsters. With tears in his eyes, he asked to kill the werewolf killer that his son had turned into of his own free will. Asking Qiutian for something twice was never necessary. Just a few moments later, Gribble's head was blown off. Relaxing in a tavern in the city of Shell, the guys talked about what tests they had to overcome today, but it wasn't easy. The main character was interested in what Danielle was planning to do now, because they had completed the order and received money for it. But as a canonical adventurer, the girl cried out to the intoxicating god. Right now, the blonde was planning to start by trying a new grape soak, and then switch to something more interesting. The young man reminded his friend of the purpose for which she began traveling. In turn, the beauty was sure that money would not harm her in this matter. The guy insisted that Danielle study the werewolf technique. Even though many people died because of it, it could help in the future. To convince the girl of this, Qiutian decided to tell a story from his past world, which concerned a sect called the Bloody Cloak. This clan used their own blood for techniques similar to those possessed by Choso and Mirai Kuriyama. They made weapons or projectiles from the red liquid. Danielle believed that her friend was talking about vampires. These were the only monsters in their world that used sanguimancy for battles. At one time, the main character completely destroyed this clan, using Haman and other techniques that included the energy of the sun, but his brother saved all the secrets of this sect. When, after some time, Qian himself found out about this, blinded by his anger, he tried to destroy the fruits of long-term studies because they had caused the death of not a single 1,000 people. However, then the brother hurried and stopped the main character, saying that knowledge is not divided into good and bad, it all depends on how you apply it. There were a lot of saved notes. The young man's brother spent more than 3 months to familiarize himself with every word and get an answer to his question. The knowledge gained allowed the guy to find out that different people had different types of blood. This also helped to develop medicine and increase the number of survivors after battles. Therefore, if the girl studies the curse, she may find other options to effectively combat them, although they could simply turn to Alucard for advice. Having heard the motivational speech, Danielle wanted to get down to business right away, but the main character reminded the blonde where they were and asked her to go to bed. The next morning began much more lively. From the prince's memory, it was possible to obtain some information about the location of a special place for rituals. To study the secrets of lycanthropy and learn how to cast this curse as well as remove it, the group went into a mysterious forest, hoping to gain new information. Previously, they had heard that demonic spirits lived here, almost the same firefighters as in the anime Fire Brigade. Such trifles did not bother the main character, because he was able to solve any problem with the help of a sword and shield, so meeting such monsters would be an easy workout. Only he didn't expect such a huge number of spirits to come at once. Hellish skeletons appeared out of nowhere and planned to attack all together. Since the girl was standing to the side, she managed to notice something strange. The movements of the monsters looked like it was some kind of ritual from Hogwarts Legacy. But as before, the guy was sure that the best option was to simply eliminate all the monsters that stood in his way. However, in the heat of battle, the young man accidentally touched some ancient structure and it suddenly began to move. The monster turned out to be a golem, almost the same as the one Luffy and his Nakama met on Egghead Island. It was difficult to understand whether he was their ally or another enemy. The awakened monster was the creation of some magician. If he was here, then most likely they chose the right place to search. But first of all, it was worth dealing with the Guardian, because his attacks, although clumsy, could cause serious harm if they hit their target. According to Danielle, this creature's body was even stronger than Kirishima's quirk from My Hero Academia. First of all, when fighting with someone like that, it was necessary to use a special acid. This time, most likely even Chang's strange powers would not help, so the girl threw her sword to him. One attack with such a weapon was enough to break the ancient golem into many parts. The guy decided in the future to study the weaknesses of the monsters of this world in a little more detail. The spells of this world looked strange to the guy, because like in alchemy, spiritual art is filled with rules and restrictions. Giving life was impossible. Therefore, he assumed that this method of using magic rather created puppets that were as evil as Lies of P. Only they were smaller there. Descending the steps inside the cave, the guys gradually came closer to the source of a pleasant aroma. An ordinary person, unlike a witcher, would not feel it. Below there was a real laboratory. The first thing that attracted Daniela's attention was the velvet bedspread. It was the smell that came from it, and the main character began to study the books. One of the practices he chose contained various information about teleportation and its possible implementation options. The blonde was surprised because she did not think that Chu Qian would be able to read it. The guy wanted to find out from Daniela what exactly this spell was for, but they were interrupted by a portal that appeared out of nowhere. The color and appearance of the funnel indicated that the idea was borrowed from Portal, although instead of a special device, magic allowed movement. A girl came out of the wormhole. She was not in a very positive mood because she met unfamiliar faces in her shelter and wanted to quickly understand what was happening here. The beauty's name was Talisa Maycumber. Watching how everything was happening, Kun assumed that the portal was a spatial spell. Now he was interested in the parameters and capabilities. Before the sorceress could harm the protagonist's party, he managed to move behind her and take away the staff. The woman could not understand how one could teleport without using preparation, but it was not easy to explain. So first of all, the main character wanted to make sure of their safety. Then Danielle intervened in the dialogue, talking about how they followed the werewolf's trail for a long time, and then ended up here. Seeing the unusual magic, the strange sorceress wanted to quickly replenish her grimoire. It seems that her obsession with spells surpassed common sense. Since the blonde did not know magic, she was not very pleased with how long the magician and the main character communicated regarding spells. Having completed the dialogue, they set off together to destroy the demonic creatures. This took a lot of time, and Danielle did not stop sulking. Still, the young man should have found the company of some bard in himself, and not hung out with witches and other witchers. The magician did not notice how the werewolf was able to create his lair near her base. She usually moves using a teleport, so she is rarely on the street. She was also interested in where the main character would go after completing the order. The young man wanted to find something special in his adventures in order to become even stronger. Classic witches were not to the Witcher's taste. Perhaps the Herald of Rivia would not agree with this, but in this story he was not the main character. The red-haired beauty was extremely interested in the story about Taoism, so she planned to dive deeper into the study of this art, hoping for Chang's support in this matter. It seems that the main character was not very happy with this idea. And besides, the sorceress specially brought to life the clothes from his world, which he had previously talked about. Trying to change the topic as quickly as possible, the guy only made the situation worse. The girl was a thrill seeker, so she wanted to try out all the options for mergers from Taoism. Soon the sorceress noticed something strange. She asked the guys to remain silent. It seemed a little strange because the guys had almost no inferior charm. Before the main character could figure it out, he and his girlfriend began to slowly move somewhere. They did not resist because the summoner of the portal was the sorceress. The technique was reminiscent in many ways of revealing Fushiguro Megumi's territory. The shadows underfoot thickened until they completely engulfed Chen and Danielle. As it turned out, the woman did this to hide her new acquaintances from the same ice sorceress who planned to kill them, watching through a magic ball. The beauty was glad to see her friend at home, because the meeting of the highest magicians would soon begin. The question of this guests from another world was extremely important for their organization. The sorceress liked her friend's new outfit. She tried to justify herself, but first of all she promised to tell her if she met the Witchers. Only the elf did not really believe in the words of the red-haired spellcaster, so she inquired from what particular world this spell had come to her. The portal sent the guys to some frozen lands, I'm not sure, but it seems to me that Bear Grylls filmed one of the episodes in these places. The landing for the blonde was not so soft, but the real fatality was the book with instructions for dummies falling on her head. The young man was glad that everything was fine with Danielle, although the book at that moment interested him even more. It was not for nothing that she moved them along with this practice. Having familiarized themselves with it in more detail, they noticed an important nuance. It was not a simple manual, but a special volume about werewolves, which was the group's original goal. Despite the day that had passed, the main character was now confident that their new friend had definitely had a hand in the werewolf case. Even though the woman was saving them from an equally crazy witch, the troubles that awaited the blonde and her friend on the other side turned out to be quite significant. They were surrounded by a huge number of Yeti. If the young man had a camera at that moment, he could get a lot of dollars if he sold these pictures. Having dealt with all the monsters, Chen and Daniela noticed an abandoned shack nearby. Since it was snowing, the best solution was to wait it out there. The main character was a little angry because they were thrown into the taiga. If this house were not here, they could freeze, so next time he wanted to show the redhead a special spell. The place where the guys found themselves was familiar to the blonde. It was called Green Mountains, even though the snow last disappeared several decades ago. Interrupting the girl in the middle of the story, the grandfather sitting in the corner of the room said that this place was cursed. The man's secrecy was incredibly improved. Even though Chen was very close, he didn't even feel anyone's presence, just like the girl, although her 5 senses were heightened. To get more information about this place, they wanted to ask the old man. His wife's name was Shauna, and most likely it was she who caused the freezing of the mountains. It all happened a few years ago. Then another war was taking place. The streets of their once peaceful city became like the wasteland of Fallout 4. Those who could at that time migrated to the south, fleeing the attacks of the northerners, but Shauna was pregnant and they could not leave their home. The long journey would have caused the loss of the child, or even the death of the woman herself, so the man decided to refuse. One of the locals reminded the then young old man of what exactly the northerners do with the people they overtake during their raid. But the man was unable to change anything. He planned to come to an agreement and save his life. This was more likely, in his opinion, than going on a long adventure. Then a local resident advised the unfortunate man to go to the witch and ask her for help. Then they considered it a good idea. Following the advice, the man took his wife to this elderly woman so that she could help in this situation, because the northerners were getting closer every minute. The witch could not refuse the children, so she decided to provide the service after all. Only later it would become clear how fatal a mistake it was to go to her. But at that moment the young family was happy, because they finally had a chance. The woman offered to take them pills of false death. The meaning of these pills was that they made it possible to create the appearance of a state of death for 24 hours. The only caveat being that everything that happened would be felt completely. The plan, according to the witch, was excellent. When the northerners arrive, the man and his wife will be dead, and the next day, when the enemies leave the village, they will come to their senses again. The man was worried that all the property they had acquired would be stolen. He was looking for an opportunity to cast a protective spell or something like that. But then the old woman said that they would no longer have anything of their own, because the pills she gave had a high price. And as a price, she wants to get everything that the young couple has. They still had time to think about accepting the offer or refusing. As evil as Yubaba from Spirited Away, despite the couple's doubts, she continued to pressure them to have everything she wanted for her use. The woman planned to leave the village in 2 days, so if the man and woman did not arrive before their expiration, she would consider the deal canceled. Thinking about this all night, The couple decided to exchange everything for their lives because nothing makes sense if you are already dead. Having taken the pills and met the Northerners in this state, the soldiers, as predicted, robbed and killed, taking any value for themselves. When they reached the man's house, they were initially disappointed because they saw only 2 corpses and an empty house. The blonde hoped for a good ending because earlier they had given everything to the witch for these same pills, which meant that there was no need for the soldiers to linger in their house. Then, continuing the story, the man mentioned one terrible detail. The Northerners were glad to see the woman in the house. At this moment, the protagonist's face spoke of his emotions. It was not easy for the man to talk about that night, even many years later. After the pill wore off, his wife was truly dead. The witch's words about losing everything began to take on a different meaning, and the husband had no choice but to bury his beloved wife. Unable to stay in his home, the grief-stricken man went on a journey to forget about the horror that had happened. A lot of time has passed since that moment, but the snow continues to fall without stopping. Previously, he saw Kaneki carrying his friend in his arms somewhere, but he could not help because of his age. The only thing the man has dreamed of since that time is to go to his wife's grave, but it was now impossible to get to her. His body had become weaker, and there were a lot of monsters. Handing over the last money, the old man noted that the guys looked a lot like witchers, so he would like to entrust them with an emergency order. The blonde did not consider the order difficult and long, so she did not plan to take that much money from the old man. Their journey through the winter desert began with clearing the territory, as previously planned. Daniela wanted to clear the name of the witchers, just as Rudeus Greyrat cleared the name of the Spurds. She was glad to meet the main character, because now she practically does not have to work, but Qian himself practically did not strain. Suddenly, another Yeti attacked from behind, as the main character stepped forward and did not have time to react in time. But it was not for nothing that the girl was called a witcher, so she managed to repel the attack and gain the required amount of time. Now this was a good opportunity to make fun of the guy, because despite his love to call himself the strongest, even he can miss one monster. Soon, in addition to the snow people, various undead also began to attack them, but skillfully combining his skills, Qian playfully dealt with everyone. The only thing that worried him was the intensity of the appearance of monsters. The closer they came to the grave, the more monsters appeared on the way. Ahead near a tree, there was the body of a man. The blonde was the first to notice him, but they could not help, because this man was already dead. The man was a member of the tiger faction, but it seems that the local monsters were stronger and eventually killed the poor fellow. His notebook indicated that there were more monsters and all sorts of monsters ahead than Suguru Ghetto had in stock. This information was not something new for the group, but information about a certain king of monsters whom they so diligently protect interested the main character. Clouds were indeed gathering over the center of the forest, as if there was something mysterious there that required urgent study. Now Chen was interested in whether the devil in this world had a special demonic pill, because it could help him become an order of magnitude stronger and help him break into a new kingdom. However, just as Danielle did not understand the main character before, she still does not understand, because many of the words he uses seem strange. The old man asked to forget about it, because despite the strength of the guys, such an adventure might not be up to them. But the young man assured the man that they would have enough strength. All the monsters they encountered died after one attack, and they still use only a small part of the strength. The behavior of the monsters was indeed strange, as if they were trying to protect someone. As that warrior suggested, most likely they have a ruler. The squad moved forward so quickly that the old man was forced to ask him to wait. As if in the movie The Mist, a thick snowstorm was filled with hundreds of monsters. Soon they managed to get to the right place. In front there was a leaning cross under which there was definitely some kind of depression. The old man could not believe what he saw. There was someone in the grave of his beloved wife, bluish eyes looking straight out of the darkness. Before anyone from the group could approach, a child covered with ice growths ran out at them. It was he who settled in this place. In order to prevent the king of monsters from harming the man, the main character raised him high up. But their customer asked to give up the child. He recognized him and the child's wife. As soon as Chen loosened his grip, the ferocious monster began to cover himself with even more protection. He definitely didn't like seeing people here. Having examined the child's face, the man was only convinced of his theory, because the baby was like 2 peas in a pod like his wife as a child. When the old man hugged him, the monster still grinned and struggled for a while, but later he still recognized the man as one of his own. He calmed down and put his hand on the man's back, even if he did not understand the speech and was hardly thinking. But even so, he was able to accept the old man's feelings. Danielle was happy for the man, because he was finally able to reunite with his family and no longer be alone in the winter. However, even close to the king, the monsters did not stop attacking them. Even if they did not touch the baby himself, they could well cause damage. Even though everything ended well, Chen insisted that they return quickly, because the attacks of the monsters will continue. Previously, they left the old man alone with the child so that they could enjoy the reunion. But when they returned back, the guy could not find the old man by his presence. The man was as secretive as Gon, who wanted to take Hisoka's dai, so despite all his genius and strength, Qian didn't even notice him nearby. They noticed that demon king ahead, but their father was not next to him, only the man's leg, which the monster defiantly raised above his head. Seeing this picture, the main character was ready to wipe the small demon off the face of the earth, but his girlfriend fought off the blow. Even though the girl deflected the sword, the difference in strength was so high that it was difficult to look at her. If not for the training that the guy conducted, there would not even be bones left of her. But the girl could not help but intervene, because she considered such an act a mistake. Even though the man had paid for his naivety, he clearly would not have wanted his son to be killed. In order for Danielle to take the medicine, the main character had to promise that he would not kill the Demon King. He was not going to treat him any better. They agreed to bury the old man later. The blonde asked Qian not to focus too much on this because they are just people and cannot save everyone. The girl's condition after one blow was extremely deplorable, but now she realized how great the strength of the young man was. It was clearly not worth exposing herself to such blows. Despite the word the young man gave, as soon as his girlfriend lost consciousness, he destroyed the monster with one blow, avenging the man and preventing the murder of other people. Even though Daniela didn't hear him, the guy still asked for forgiveness for his action, but he couldn't do otherwise in this situation. There was a village ahead, so the guys hoped to rest there for a while. Besides, the girl had to recover from the medicine. To spend the night, the blonde asked the main character to hide her badge. Few people would want to let witchers into their place. Turning to one of the people, the guy asked for accommodation for the night. They were ready to pay, but the local resident was interested in what had happened to the girl. The man suggested that the main character and his girlfriend came from the lands of eternal winter. This had already happened before, so they were ready to help for free. They were given a house, but they were asked not to move close to the backyard under any circumstances. Even though the conditions were not bad, the owner apologized because he could not offer more. When the young man asked what was there, the angry man asked him to mind his own business and simply not go there. Realizing how difficult their situation was, Qian, despite his stubborn nature, did not appear and asked for forgiveness. The backyard at first glance looked quite ordinary: stonework, a supply of firewood, and a couple of plants. But the real secret was kept in a shed nearby. Inside, under the castle, chained to the wall, there was an infected woman. Instead of hair, there were a lot of mushrooms on her head. She looked like the infected from the game The Last of Us. This time, a villager came to feed the woman affected by the virus. He brought her a rabbit so that she could get enough of it. Having given the meat to the woman, the man turned to someone unknown who, apparently, was in the shadows. He talked about the main character and his friend. This reminded him of the situation that had happened earlier. Perhaps he saw himself in the young man's eyes, which made him a little worried. Even though the people were strangers, the owner could not drive them away, especially after he understood where they came from. The shadow didn't mind, but ordered him to carefully monitor the backyard and the safety of his secret, otherwise something terrible would happen. The guy was already familiar with the works of Junji Ito. He wouldn't be scared that easily. It seems that this woman was previously a dear person to the man, because he was upset about this situation. He had not seen her normal face for a long time and had not heard her voice. When he used a special medicine, her condition became stable for some time. The growths receded a little, and a small part of her face was visible behind a pile of multicolored mushrooms. A man shared with an infected woman how often he wants to just put all those mushrooms away, but stops when he realizes he doesn't know what it might lead to. Meanwhile, the blonde felt better. Despite the wounds she received, she practiced spiritual energy. This should also help her recover. The girl did not understand why they were slow to cure her. Then Qian explained that they were in an unfamiliar village, and the residents treated them with suspicion, as if they were playing Resident Evil 2. If the locals found out about their real profession, they would not only force them to leave the village, but most likely they could even kill them. More importantly, the young man wanted to quickly help Danielle break through to the next level. Even though she had only recently started studying the spiritual arts, she was doing great. When the young man was finally able to combine constant support for the student, as well as checking the territory for the presence of people, he noticed in the window how the man was detained by soldiers. They came to resolve the issue regarding the infected person. They tried to enter into the position of the owner, but it was believed that after being infected by the fungus, the person could not be saved. Since this was the man's wife, he did not want to give up and was sure that he would be able to save her after some time. He tried to gain at least a little time. No matter how much the soldier wanted to get into the situation, they were given an order. Besides, it was impossible to consider someone infected with this disease as a person, because just one moment of calm and you will be eaten. Many tried to provide support. Sorceresses, witchers, healers, alchemists, even asked shamans, but no one could suggest any option. Even though they treated him with understanding and tried to help, the man did not plan to agree with such a foundation. He did not know any martial arts, but he was able to scatter 3 soldiers. Having turned on berserk mode, the owner planned to deal with those who threatened his wife and continue the search for treatment. But since the man's rash behavior endangered other people, the commander was unable to just leave it like that. Unable to stay on the sidelines, the blonde decided to intervene. She opened the doors. The main character was not very happy with such an initiative, because the girl's wounds still had not healed. Noticing the beauty in the doorway, the soldiers assumed at first that she was the man's daughter, but their hair color was different, and they had not seen her before. The owner of the house asked not to get involved in this, because they were just ordinary guests who came to recuperate, and not to get involved in their problems. Then, noticing how frivolously those around her were treating her, Daniela was forced to take out her witcher's medallion. But the soldier only continued to laugh when he saw which school the girl belonged to. The demonic cat was considered not a particularly decent organization. They collected money for living with the help of cunning, insidious, and vile plans, taking on the execution of requests for the liquidation of noble people and everything in that spirit. Believing that the girl did not pose a threat, the soldier continued to rudely drive himself. He suggested that the blonde should learn more before they considered her a real monster hunter. Watching from the side, Chu-Tian remembered the words of his master. The old man told how important it is to do good deeds and destroy evil. The guy reacted quite aggressively, so the soldiers were ready for battle. They did not consider the 2 witchers a threat. When the main character used his closing the universe technique, the man at first did not understand what these words meant. And then before he could understand, he found himself shackled in chains. Other soldiers were also in a similar situation. None of them could free themselves from the equipment. The captain had the opportunity to avoid a bad ending, because otherwise the main character was ready to quickly get rid of several people without anyone noticing. He considered such an act fair, because the man had previously planned to do something similar to the owner of the house if he continued to be stubborn. Seeing the strength of the young people, the captain was forced to tell about the monster that was locked in a shed in the backyard of the house. All the soldiers were worried about was the safety of other people, because one day the creature might not be there, which means all the nearby villages would be under attack. The captain was unable to follow up on something with the man. He must bear his duty, and not listen to the story of a man with a bad fate, after which he pointed to the owner of the house. The soldier understood that he could not defeat the main character, so he tried to use his eloquence to the maximum. Even though Chu-Tian didn't particularly plan to listen to the captain, the situation reminded him more and more of the old man who died because of his love for the monster. The young man could not allow something like this to happen again, so he undertook to solve this problem on his own. First of all, they needed to examine the infected. The main character turned to the man and asked permission to be examined, because they didn't even know what they were dealing with. Having received a positive answer, Chen canceled the spell that bound the soldiers like Dr. Strange. He smoothly moved all the chains until they disintegrated into small particles. The main character planned to deal with everything, so he sent his student to rest so that she would not waste energy on such things. The dungeon in which the guy found himself was small, but there was enough space for prisoners. The woman's condition was truly deplorable. Even though the guy's strength was incredibly high, he still wasn't able to follow anything. The first step he decided to test was his guess. To give them time to find a solution, the boy cast a spell on the woman. If she tried to leave this place, she would turn into a fried chicken from KFC. This solution made it possible to please everyone at once. The soldier would not have to worry about the safety of others. The man would be able to continue searching for a cure, and he himself would repay for the help provided. The owner of the house was extremely happy to help. He did not know how he could thank the main character, but he just refused. Before leaving, the guy said that there was no more snow on the mountains of eternal winter. There were still many monsters there, but their leader was defeated. Since the demon hunters did not reveal themselves on purpose, the captain will have to clarify some points with them the next day. In the morning, the soldier was already waiting for the main character and his student. He arrived too early, so all that was left was to sleep, waiting for the witchers. Soon the blonde came out of the house. Her condition was excellent, although last day she could barely stand on her feet, like Might Guy after opening the gates of death in the battle with Madara. The girl didn't understand where everyone else was and where they were going, because Qian didn't tell her anything. According to the captain, other soldiers went ahead. And the old man, on the boy's advice, went to the mountains where it was really possible to be there now. He quickly realized this when he discovered all the monsters killed by the main character. There were so many Yeti that it would be enough to make his own small winter clothing store from their fur. The road to the castle took a lot of time. They managed to get to the place only at night when the sun had long set. They were given a small room. Right now the guys could rest, and in the morning the captain would introduce them to the local ruler, who has the rank of Baron. The young master was interested in what assignment the next aristocrat would approach him with. Then the soldier told him that they needed to kill certain types of monsters. Seeing the strength of the main character, the man thought that he could cope even with the Night Fury, the strongest and most dangerous among all the dragons of their world. All this hospitality and the polite stomp of the captain will not help them fool experienced witchers, which Qian hastened to inform the man so that he would not have false hopes. The student also decided to intervene. She reminded the soldier that people are not considered monsters, which means that witchers do not take orders for their extermination. The captain began to make excuses, trying to explain. They really wanted to ask to destroy the monsters, then the blonde wanted to find out who exactly they would be dealing with. The purpose of the order was an angel. This was unusual to hear, because such creatures were considered special and untouchable in many religions. The soldier could not explain everything, but he assured the guys that they would understand why the Baron made such a decision when they learned the rest of the details of the case the next day. Despite the fame of this creature, there were no such things in Qian's world, so he wanted to find out from the blonde who exactly he was talking about. At their core, angels were the embodiment of the soul of God in mortal guise. In other words, they possessed special powers beyond ordinary people. Angels live far from civilization, enjoy nature, and fly in the sky as if they were planes from a fortnight bus, spreading their wing feathers along the way. They fed on the energy of nature, but were truly insidious creatures that could not only deceive naive people, but even kill them. The next morning, as promised, the protagonist group found themselves at a meeting with the Baron of these lands. The captain and deputy ruler were also in the room. The man spoke about the grief that happened several years ago. The echoes of this rampage of war and chaos are still visible in the world. But the hardest thing is for those who left their home. Their world was so cruel that even those gods and spirits they prayed to were actually evil monsters capable of killing a person in an instant. Problems with the angel arose after the end of the war. When peace reigned, there were simply no longer those who were ready to sacrifice their children. Then the monster decided not to hold back. No one wanted to enter into an open confrontation with a monster whose strength could compare with the Black Clover Sorcerer King, so it was decided to ask the Witchers. The main character did not understand why the divine being needed human children. Then the Baron spoke about the incidents that had happened recently. The angel absorbed the powers of newborns and already strong babies. When the donations stopped, the creature began to wander into their territory and independently choose its targets. Having heard the whole story, the guy simply could not stay away. He decided to take on this job and kill the angel. Senior Officer Kamra was placed in their detachment to accompany them. She knew the surroundings very well, so she could help find the monster. But the guys did not yet know that a monster worse than Pudge awaited them ahead. He settled in the forest nearby and happily ate the people he had caught. The girl officer led the boys to the entrance to the desired location, but did not plan to go further with them. She also told more about the reward that awaits the Witchers upon their return. The guy didn't really care about such things, so he and Danielle just set off, approaching the forest. The young man finally decided to ask if there was something special about the angels. The only thing the blonde could talk about was the strange changes that the angels had undergone, because a couple of decades ago, they were considered an example of purity and order. Gradually moving further and further, the boy felt a strange aura surrounding this place. A lot of greenery grew around, and small creatures were hiding behind these thickets. Then the blonde drew the mentor's attention to the trees ahead. They looked much more impressive and imbued with magic than those they had encountered before. If you believe the words of the soldiers and also the Baron, they were approaching the right place because the end point was such a tangled forest that it was really easier to burn it. Even though everything around her looked like paradise, she actually planned to stab her in the back, so the young man asked Danielle not to eat, drink, or touch anything if possible. If Groot or some other similar monster was hiding among the bushes somewhere, they should have avoided him if possible. The angel's plan was figured out quickly enough. The guy was surprised at how much effort the monster spent on creating this cute picture. The beautiful creature was extremely surprised because she did not consider the main character to be so insightful. She simply liked such an environment, so she supports this illusion. True, Qian did not agree with her, because no matter how much you create the illusion of paradise, it will still remain a simple illusion. Angel still didn't understand what exactly the problem was, because in her opinion, any work is worthy if effort and desire are put into it. Of course, the divine essence itself understood that most likely this forest only seems like paradise. In fact, it is a real part of the world. The girl suggested continuing the conversation in her house, and Daniela, who was watching everything, could not understand what skill the main character had that was responsible for such establishing contacts with unusual women. Then the angel curled up into a small ball and began to cry, because she was from another world and could not return back for some reason. Realizing that hunters had come to her, she invited the guys to consider her proposal after all. Witchers from time immemorial worked not only with people. She was ready to share everything she had in order to gain Chu Qian's power, even if only for a short period of time. Her order was to kill her, after which the main character would be able to get a large number of bonuses. This would be his reward. The blonde continued to complain, because as soon as another girl appears in the background, she immediately becomes a secondary character, and she really didn't like it. The guy wasn't the type to be won over so easily with 2 large watermelons and sweet promises, so before he took on the order, he wanted to clarify some points. The angel was ready to answer any questions, except those that due to his nature or limitations he could not answer. Then the guy asked about the people stolen from the village. The woman did not try to hide the fact that she fed on people and other creatures of this world. For her, as a higher point in the food chain, this was the norm. Then the main character decided to ask why the angel wants to be killed. She said that she knows the strength of the main character, and if you choose between a quick and painful death, she knows the answer. It was almost impossible to kill an angel. Such is their nature, so she hoped that such a powerful person as Qian could come up with a solution to her eternal problem. The guy still had one more question. Even though he knew how painful immortality can be, the ending of Fairy Tail spoke about this extremely eloquently. It concerned the original world from which the angel arrived. It was the Gardens of Eden that hovered high in the skies. But after one incident, they all had to leave this place. Hearing the story of the mythical creature, Danielle was surprised because she was exactly the same as the main character, because he too was transported from another dimension here. The girl was extremely surprised to hear this. Then the winged one decided to talk a little about the place where she lived before. The home of all the angels was a heavenly island floating in the sky among the clouds, although it was not Skypia, but that place was considered prosperous by many. However, one day the angels noticed that their house began to slowly sag and sink to the ground. The reason for this was a hellish monster that came to ruin their house. The monster had never been encountered by anyone before. Despite its power, even a dozen angels failed to cope with the task and were unable to defeat one monster. Previously, our angel was a Valkyrie. She learned the art of combat and advanced at a fairly fast pace. She was even able to sense the existence of other worlds. Then, in order to save herself, the girl moved to the world of people, where she acquired a different appearance and became susceptible to hunger, and the best way to satisfy it is to absorb the powers of people. The beauty was truly happy, because a strong enough wizard came to her capable of looking through the illusion. Before dispelling her false world, the fallen angel asked to destroy her no matter what, because if the main character fails, then this raid boss is invincible. The last wish that the girl wanted to fulfill, because her appearance became similar to the homunculus Gluttony from Full Metal Alchemist, she could not suppress her hunger. Warnings and a request from a new friend indicated that holding back his powers was a bad idea, so the main character used an enhanced version of his usual technique. But the technique, which only upon contact broke several of the Witcher's bones, bounced off the angel as if it were not a spiritual weapon, but some kind of toothpicks. Despite the failure, the creature felt pain, which means, as the guy promised the angel, he had to figure out how to eliminate his target less painfully. Only due to the fact that it was not possible to cause harm with the usual technique that killed any representative of this world, the main character became truly interested in this fight. After all, the fallen angel is the first opponent who was able to survive after this trick, but he asked the girl not to lose heart. After all, this is only a small part of his strength. Cayenne was confident in his defense, so he told the angel that if they could not hurt each other, then their fight could continue indefinitely. The desire of a mythical creature for death in the world of the protagonist was considered something sacred, because sex considered the end of life to be one of the points of improvement. The boy wanted to talk to the fallen angel to get to know her better, but she continued the battle, hoping to emerge from the fight as a loser. Her real form was not only beautiful, but also more effective when it came to combat. She easily transformed and began using special beams. During the time that the young man spent in this world, this was the first truly worthy battle. His opponent used an unusual technique, and his speed was higher than that of the last Seraphim. Angel used multiple copies of herself to attack from multiple directions at once. Thanks to this trick, she was able to kill most of the hunters who went to kill her. All the rays launched towards the young man could cause damage even to him, even though earlier the guy had practically become a god in his world. It was not easy to fight an enemy capable of using illusions so effectively, combining them with lightning attacks, so the main character decided to change his approach. Concentrating the energy in his mind, he clearly saw the image of each of the clones who were nearby. Counting the amount of energy in the copy, the guy tried to find the real one to attack it, rather than fight with the air every time. A few moments later, the original was noticed, after which Qian no less quickly began to approach the fallen angel, concentrating energy on the tip of his blade. Even though the girl managed to escape from the blow, her injuries turned out to be very serious. She quickly realized that the guy standing in front of her was the strongest in their dimension. The intensity of the attacks was so high that normal observation from the outside seemed like a roller coaster ride with 3D glasses. The angel and the main character inflicted many attacks on each other, but the guy significantly dominated. Still, he had more strength on his side, but the woman was ready to withstand another blow. Then Qian decided not to hold back and showed his opponent the true power that he possessed. Master Qi was behind him. The 1-inch technique, Bruce Lee's signature move when used with spiritual energy, allowed him to inflict enormous damage on his opponent without even straining himself. The mythical creature realized that his time had come because the angel could not survive this technique. His power was so great that it broke through the highest barrier. Feeling the approach of death, the angel thanked Qian for his help, because he was really able to fulfill her order, despite its absurd complexity. When the real body of the angel fell, the guy hurried to help his girlfriend move to a better place. He had to accompany her on this path. Despite the fact that the order was to kill an angel, the guy wanted to make sure that the suffering woman ended up where she wanted to be most after death. Even if their acquaintance was not long, the young man wanted to at least bury the angel in this place, which had been her home in recent years. But before doing this, he insisted that the ghost hiding in the shadows finally show itself, because such tricks did not work on the main character. It was Tanika Fiore, nicknamed Cold as Ice Cream. She shared her thoughts about the heavenly exchange. It was because of him that the guy moved to their world. Regardless of her intentions, the sorceress allowed the main character to erect a grave for the angel. She exhausted all the power remaining in her and, as she should have, died. The guy was interested in why the woman came for them. She did not hide it because she was not their friend. Her goal was to kill the guy after cutting him off. Not wanting to prolong this moment, Chen suggested that the guest attack him right away so that they would not complicate each other's lives and could immediately resolve their conflict. Only after watching the battle between the main character and the angel, the sorceress realized how difficult this battle would be. There was practically no chance of victory, so she decided to refrain from the battle. The appearance of another woman extremely interested in the boy continued to irritate his student, because he doesn't even use Tinder from sorceresses to get acquainted. Even though she couldn't kill Qian now, the Ice Queen decided that she would pursue the main character like a shadow, striking him in the back at the first opportunity. The guy considered such cooperation too tiring, so he suggested that Fiore simply accompany them on the journey, so as not to complicate the already difficult life of the Witcher. The young elf's behavior greatly offended the proud elf. Even though she was called Cold, she simply could not help but react to such impudent words. Since there was no other choice, the magician decided to follow the Witchers further. In the evening, they reached the forest, where the hired killers were already waiting for the group. The main character was too lazy to deal with everyone one by one, so using his spiritual sword, he simply destroyed the entire squad of killers. The difference in strength between an ordinary person and Chu Chen became more and more obvious. At this moment, Fiore even thought that it would be better to lure such a sorcerer rather than try to kill him. Returning back to the Baron with good news, the guys hoped to receive a generous reward for their efforts, because they managed to defeat the angel himself. The beautiful magician, who was watching everything from the side, was definitely up to something bad when she saw the ruler of these lands in person. Fiore went somewhere before the main character and Daniela, so the guys returned to their room where they began to get ready to continue on their journey. While the main character was reading one of the letters he left, loud screams were heard from the corridor. Something definitely happened, so the guys hurried to return. In the corridor, one could notice a significant problem. I had to remember in advance exactly how to escape from prison in a way out, because the Baron was lying on the floor and Fiore was standing over his body. The beauty planned to quickly figure it out and leave, but the guards caught up with her faster than this could be realized. Surrendering without a fight was not part of the elf code, so the girl was not at a loss and began to cast a spell as soon as she found herself in this difficult situation. The technique used made it possible to move to another place, but the sorceress was incredibly surprised to see the face of the main character and his student upon arrival. The young man himself did not care about exactly how the sorceress lived, but because of her act, now they are not going to let them go either, because the one they brought killed the ruler. After just a few moments, the main character moved everyone outside the castle. Since there were no more soldiers around, he wanted to get answers from his new team member. But the elf did not understand what the problem was, that she killed a ruler unworthy in her opinion. Even if she did it, her reference goal will always be Chen. According to Fiore, 10 of the strongest spellcasters came together and created an artifact of unprecedented power, capable of showing the future of a specific person. Later, this ball showed how in the future the Baron will cause a huge war, and many innocent people will die because of him. But even so, Danielle could not accept this opinion. To verify his theory, the guy summoned a yin-yang circle. His technique looked impressive, but only allowed him to learn a few things. First of all, he learned that the Baron was still alive. He just found himself in a very difficult situation, and the guy also realized that being among those branded a warlock is not so bad. Regardless of how it all ended, the boy planned to travel further, but his girlfriend still could not believe that the ruler was alive. Before they set off, something strange happened to Danielle. She turned to the main character as one of the great Taoists of this world. An unknown person ordered the girl to get rid of the main character once and for all, using his power. At the same moment, Danielle's hand pierced Qian's body as if a knife had passed through butter, her eyes at that moment glowing with blue fire, as if she was possessed by Bill Cipher from Gravity Falls. The blow touched internal organs, and the main character almost immediately lost consciousness. While he was unconscious, moments from a past life popped up in his head, where he communicated with his brother about dark and light energy. The guy did not understand why it was so difficult to get rid of evil. According to Chang's relative, it is impossible to completely get rid of darkness, because it lives inside every person, and as long as there is at least one magician in this world, there will be dark energy. 10 years ago, the Lord of Darkness, according to his brother, came to this world to wreak havoc and destruction. He was defeated, but before his death, the creature's body disappeared somewhere. Since evil will never stop filling their dimension, all people needed their own hero. They did not have Superman, so the most capable student had to take his place. Having experienced these memories again, the main character woke up in an unknown place with those same 10 sorceresses around him. Even though it was still too early for the young man to get up, he hurried to return to duty, because he did not know what condition his girlfriend was in. And it was also necessary to find out who was behind this. Even though his chest had been pierced, there wasn't even a small scar left now. All the sorceresses present were amazed not only by the guy's regeneration power, but even by the size of the mana column. It was the red-haired sorceress who was most influenced. Just like Tsukasa, as soon as the young man woke up, the first thing he asked was how things were right now. Italianoiter, the girl standing behind the main character, having seen him in person, was finally convinced that no one could be found more powerful than the boy in this dimension. Only their enemy was not so strong physically or through magic. He achieved what he wanted with the help of cunning plans and connections, so to defeat this enemy, the sorceresses needed the power of Qian. The young man, confident in his abilities, planned to immediately go and talk with his hater, but his spell was cancelled for an unknown reason. For the first time, Chen failed to achieve what he wanted. He was shocked because previously any obstacle on the way seemed just a small fence that he could easily cross. A lot of time has passed since the last moment. The girls were discussing the current situation. The main character could not use his powers, and Danielle disappeared without a trace. But Italianoiter believed that even though the young man now cannot use his spiritual techniques, he also remains one of the strongest people in this world due to his knowledge and physical skills. The feeling of falling from the top may seem like a heavy burden for a guy, but thanks to this he can become even stronger, so the sorceress believed. Having received news from his red-haired girlfriend, the young man wanted to go with her to the destroyed village to try to find Daniela's trace. Woman Yen was confident that Chen would be able to do this, because his condition was now quite deplorable. To refuse the main character's request when he so persistently asked for it was beyond the girl's capabilities, so they went to the village together. The situation was quite serious. There were no survivors then. Using the remnants of his strength, the young man decided to study the crime scene. Thanks to spiritual practices, reconnaissance went much faster. The young man was convinced that there was not a single monster nearby. Using various spells to enhance his own senses, Qian analyzed the situation and made assumptions based on the information received. His technique was not as advanced as the gadget indicating the path to the goal from Dead Space, but it did a good job of helping his friends study crime scenes. The red-haired beauty was very worried about the main character because she liked him even during the first meeting. And now, after so much time, he has completely become one of her own. The girl tried to support her loved one, but gave him an idea because he possessed spells from the Bloody Cloak sect, which could help find out the cause of death. While studying one of the bodies, the guy noticed how unusual the wounds were. No monster was capable of inflicting such neat and even cuts. A bloody examination revealed that the murder weapon was a silver sword, but ordinary people do not fight with such weapons because of their price and lack of stability. The main character asked whether their world would accept someone who had a power similar to his. But if its basis was built on negative energy, the girl saw no reason for the dimension to reject such people. Even though there were witches and witches in this world, everything looked somehow unnatural. The puzzle in the young man's head did not fit. Then he finally remembered that earlier Daniela had told the guy that witchers fight people with a steel blade and use a silver blade only against monsters. His student's strength was higher than could be imagined from an ordinary witcher, so there simply could not be a situation in which she would be forced to take out the wrong blade. In other words, the killer was someone else. Part of the blood on the battlefield belonged to the hunter himself, so the young man asked his girlfriend to track the target with her help. Before Chen could finish speaking, a magic circle of transference had already appeared under his feet, reminding him of not particularly pleasant memories. At the opposite place of transfer was a warrior who, like Toji, owned a huge amount of weapons and fought only at his expense. The warrior was not particularly happy with his guests. They moved faster than he expected, so it was not possible to leave traps or prepare an ambush. As Chen had expected, the killer of the villagers was not his student, but some random witcher who had quarreled with the locals and decided to resolve the issue quickly. To prevent the battle from starting, the sorceress turned to the undead hunter. She asked him to lower the blade because they had no enemies. The young man decided to ask directly about the village, assuming that the stranger could provide them with the key to solving this riddle. Unexpectedly for the guys themselves, the witcher turned out to be very accommodating. He put the blade aside and was ready to share his story. When the man came to receive a reward for the completed order, the residents did not react very positively to this desire, even though the monster he killed posed a huge danger. The locals surrounded him and were ready to kill him, so the witcher had to defend himself. But in this case, the young man did not understand why he had to kill absolutely everyone. It quickly became clear that the parties would not be able to find a compromise, so the guy decided to become a judge and decide the fate of the demon hunter. The man himself was not particularly happy about this initiative, but despite his weakness, the guy decided to enter the battle personally in order to prove his position with action. The exchange of blows turned out to be so intense that the Witcher's sword, forged from silver, not inferior in size to Guts' Dragon Slayer, was almost completely broken. However, as an atonement instead of killing, the young man wanted to undergo initiations and become one of them, even if killing the hunter would not be a problem for him. The man could not understand why the guy was ready to do this, because the probability of dying during the green grass ritual is 90%, and the guy is already quite strong. Earlier back in the castle, Danielle talked about this method. After going through it, an ordinary demon hunter becomes true, discovering new powers and possibilities in himself. Having lost most of his strength, all that remains for the main character to try to achieve something more, the best option is to become a witcher, because then he will gain many of his past abilities. Having learned that a stranger wanted to join their tribe of outcasts, Carl Maddock was glad to help, because every year the number of demon hunters is only decreasing. A warlock was also required to carry out the ritual, but due to the red-haired beauty nearby, this condition was quite easy to fulfill. The composition of the decoction was very specific. In order to obtain imbued abilities such as complete invulnerability to poison, night vision, and improved sense of smell, it was necessary to take the strength of many monsters. Having written a complete list of necessary items, Carl asked the guy to assemble everything himself, because he only had a few ingredients, and besides, his wounds had not yet healed. He gave the main character 3 months to prepare, during which time he will be in this place or somewhere nearby. The red-haired beauty did not mind helping in collecting the necessary components. She was sure that most of the necessary reagents were in their warehouse. Many of these items seemed extremely unusual, including the venom glands of a flying lion, the cerebrospinal fluid of a tooth-tailed dragon, and the tongue of an albino banshee. Carl himself could talk about some of the ingredients because he is not only a cool witcher, but also a fan of World of Warcraft. He knew a lot about herbalism, leatherworking, and enchanting. Getting almost every fragment was not some kind of supernatural task, but one component still got out, the so-called mother's tears. Collecting this material was extremely difficult. It was found infrequently and served as a very powerful ingredient for potions. The girl was very upset, because there was a period in the history of magic when dark magicians used their own mothers and other relatives to obtain this material. A tear of pure love was available to few witchers, because most of them were orphans deprived of love. The young man had no ideas on how to complete the task of collecting this ingredient, so he decided to check with Carl how he obtained the material for the ritual earlier. But the man only said that he had not personally dealt with this before, so now he could only introduce him to someone who has the necessary experience in this matter. The witcher's good friend's name was Emily. She traveled the world, so finding her would not be an easy task. The only way the man could help was from mutual acquaintances he heard about how she sold herbs near the city of Redania, where a troop of phantoms lived, among which Kororo Lucifer especially stood out. The required place was extremely far from the zone in which they were now, and for travel it would be nice to acquire some kind of fast and safe mode of transport. The main character wondered why they couldn't simply teleport, but moving over vast distances was a spell that could only be used once a month. Even though they needed to go on a trip as soon as possible, there was no point in doing it right now because they needed to rest and prepare. At night, the main character had a terrible dream about the day when Danielle took away most of his power. Then, having already lost consciousness, somewhere in the distance he heard the voice of the one who controlled the girl. Suddenly waking up, the guy realized that everything that was happening was just an ordinary nightmare, but even so, he needed some time to catch his breath. Due to anxiety and recent events, Chen could not sleep. He decided to write something down on a piece of paper so that he could show it to Carl the next day. The first place where the main character decided to go was the forest, where it was possible to collect most of the ingredients that were still needed. Carl was not against it, but in this case he did not need to go with Chang and the warlock, because that location practically does not contain dangerous monsters or any traps. The girl didn't sleep that night either. She was curious about what the young man wrote for half the night. Then he handed over a sheet of notes. The red-haired beauty was surprised, because she didn't even think that the guy would take the mission so seriously. It was his style to improvise on the fly. Thanking Carl for his help, Qian's group went to the Dark Shadow Forest. As the name implies, many monsters emitting dark energy lived inside it. Many of them could even hide and attack from the shadows, and considering that right now the main character is half human, a mistake could cost them dearly. Making their way through the dense forest, the guys were gradually able to reach the door that led deeper into the cave. They could not miss this find because there was definitely something inside. The young man hoped to receive the boots of Hermes or some other unusual artifact to replenish his lost strength, but the truth turned out to be not so interesting. There was only one person inside the stone room. He looked strange and did not answer the questions asked by the main character. The man introduced himself as a slave of the forest. He guarded this door and opened it to everyone who came here to find something important. Anyone could enter inside, no matter what intentions were in the person's mind. Only serious trials awaited ahead. Walking through the crypt, the team managed to easily deal with traps and locked doors. The dragon they needed was located in the depths of this stone shelter. The mysterious old man wished the young man and his companion good luck, after which he slammed the stone door, which was one of two exits. Although Carl said that this was not such a serious test, Chen quickly realized how problematic hunting this ancient dragon would be. Going down the steps, the young man and the sorceress discussed what exactly the old man's words meant. He definitely could not be trusted, even though at first glance he seemed harmless. When the group finally reached the deepest floor, they met only a few mice which were peacefully looking for something in the ground. The girl expected to see something more grandiose. As soon as she said this, a fiery ray rushed right in front of her face. If the boy had not been nearby, all that would have been left of her would have been just bones. It looks like they walked straight into this dragon's trap, because the ground began to break right under their feet, creating real traps out of the rubble. Soon, this fire dragon from the last biome in the game, Subnautica, appeared. In order to dodge its attacks, the young man even had to resort to flying on a sword. The battle continued. The awakening of the monster allowed the guys to get to the surface. Now it was not so difficult to resist such a huge enemy. Dodging one of the fiery volleys, the boy landed on a rock in the middle of a pond to launch a counterattack. The situation in which the main character and his girlfriend found themselves was quite sensitive, but using the moisture surrounding them, the magician began to erect a barrier. She was not very confident in this idea, and asked Chen to warn him if he wanted to walk on the edge, because dying for nothing was not part of her plans. By combining defensive and offensive spells, they still managed to cause serious damage to the dragon, damaging its right eye. The monster fell into the lake, after which the red-haired beauty planned to hold it in place while the young man struck with his sword. Previously, thanks to divine power, the boy could soar in the air without any restrictions, but now his limit is only 10 breaths. Even so, by working together, the group managed to seriously injure the dragon, preventing it from attacking or casting any spells. To inflict additional damage, the guy enchanted his blade with the breath of the sun. It was effective not only in battle with demons, but also showed itself against other opponents. A hail of blows rained down on the huge monster. It was severely wounded, but the end had not yet come for it. Noticing that old man nearby, the young man decided not to understand how and why all this happened. He simply got rid of the one who lured them into a trap. Meanwhile, Carl reached the village where the main character and his girlfriend stopped after traveling through the mountains of eternal snow. The main character gave the Witcher a note, which was addressed to the man whose wife he protected from the attacks of the Baron's army. After making sure that the stranger standing in front of him did not pose a threat to the infected woman, the man took Carl to the backyard so that he could examine the disease-stricken woman. While it was impossible to say for sure whether it would be possible to save the local resident's family, Carl did not plan to give false hope, but promised to do everything in his power. The battle with the dragon continued. The battle turned out to be extremely difficult, so even though the red-haired sorceress stood behind, she still got it. But thanks to Qian's help, they successfully defeated the monster and began to collect the reagents necessary for transformation. They moved to the protagonist's pocket dimension. Once the team completed their preparations, they moved to the headquarters of the female sorcerers to plan their next move and get a little closer through the portals. True. Before the guys could leave the building, Fiore came to them, who also wanted to take part in leveling up the main character. The guy didn't understand yet, but the enmity between two powerful magicians began precisely because of him. It seemed strange to him, but none of the girls wanted to give in. The blonde didn't like the fact that the red-haired beauty wanted to go through the entire adventure with the main character alone, so Fiore insisted that she go with him this time. The agreement between the magicians seemed strange to the young man, but he did not plan to get involved in a showdown between two formidable girls because he still wanted to see this world. Fiore asked Chen to tell him more about the place where they were supposed to go because she was not aware of how the events were going. However, he was not sure that he remembered all the necessary information correctly, so he tried to avoid answering. The city of Redania was located in the desert. The scorching sun, a huge number of inhabitants, as well as a lot of ripe fruits were the main attributes of this place. To speed up the search for Emily, the guy suggested that Tanika split up so they wouldn't have to interfere with each other, and even if something happened, he wouldn't be imprisoned because of the witch's tricks. Traveling through the market of this unusual city, the young man wanted to see the trading campaign of Sinbad the Conqueror of the Labyrinths, but only small shops caught his eye. His attention was attracted by unusual jewelry. It contained a large number of different jewelry and rare materials. Local residents quickly recognized an interested buyer from abroad, so the saleswoman decided to tell the legend about why they make these jewelry. It is believed that their city is watched over by an unusual deer. His power surpasses any other. So to honor him, the people of Redania use antlers and jewelry to gain the deity's favor. Even though his floating powers weakened, he could feel a strange presence behind him. It was a beautiful girl who was interested in why it was the jewelry that attracted the young man's attention. The beauty's name was Mello. She worked as a photographer at the Emily Commercial Bank. She collected information about people and traditions, so she gave the envelope to Qian so that he could find her if necessary. The pleasant conversation was interrupted by a loud explosion coming from somewhere in the palace. The cries of, "Don't let this woman escape," alarmed the main character a little, because he had a friend who was worse than any disaster. Seeing the main character, Tanika Fiore asked him to hurry up because they absolutely couldn't linger in one place right now. Even though the blonde made a lot of noise, she couldn't find any information about Emily. Few people even knew this name, not to mention the location. A little in shock after the latest events, the main character took out an envelope from his pocket. The sorceress became interested in the unusual object, and she quickly snatched it. Reading the title, she knew it was what they were looking for. The envelope had the address of Emily's Chamber of Commerce on it. As soon as it got dark outside, the guys returned back to the city, hoping that no one remembered the girl's face. To enroll in the Chamber of Commerce, you had to make an appointment, a process that could take some time. But thanks to the envelope that the guy had earlier received at the market, getting inside turned out to be much easier than he expected. A luxurious hall was hidden inside the room. It was no worse than their main base, where all negotiations were held and the future of the rulers was monitored. The guy tried to ask one of the workers where he could find Miss Emily, but the girl was new and a little worried. She could barely say that her boss was busy right now, so she couldn't receive guests. Most likely she wouldn't be able to do this for a few more days. Remembering exactly how they got inside, the young man took the same invitation out of his pocket and handed it to the secretary, asking for forgiveness. She immediately took the group to the right room. It was difficult to believe that this paper helped solve all their problems, as if they had not existed at all. The worker asked the guys to go inside. The girl's appearance was truly amazing. Miss Emily looked no worse than Aphrodite from the anime Maybe I'll Meet You in the Dungeon. She was glad to see the guests, but did not know why they came to her. Then the main character turned to the girl and asked her to tell her about how they could get her mother's tears. There was a proverb that used to be in fashion among hunters, but not many people know it today. In short, a demon hunter should receive a reward thanks to the law of surprise. An ignorant person, even if he overhears, will not be able to even come close to understanding the desired meaning, which means this is an excellent opportunity to hide secrets. There were similar poems in the young man's homeland, but their name in this world was no less strange than the name of the main character. When he asked for an explanation, Emily decided to start with the law of accidents. It was a Witcher custom that concerned their orders. If, having provided a service to a person before concluding a contract, the Witcher ultimately does not receive his reward, he has the right to go to the house of the rescued person and take the first object that catches his eye. Sometimes the hunter takes a child as a reward. This is necessary to preserve traditions. It is these children who later become Witchers of the new generation. The mother's tears would shed at the moment of parting, and this would be a necessary component. But the young man did not want to do this. His principles did not allow this. Emily was interested in the protagonist's answer, because not everyone could give up the simple path just to save someone's family from grief. Then, as an alternative, the girl offered other information. She knew about the last incident in which this material was noticed. Someone stole a piece of jewelry called the Moon Shadow Flower. If you choose an alternative path, then it was from this jewelry that you could get the necessary material. It was possible to find this treasure at an underground auction. Of course, this is a more difficult task than taking on a student, but still possible. Having wished good luck to the guys, Emily stood at the window and looked mysteriously into the distance. She hoped that God himself would help the main character along the way, but Chen had no particular desire to get involved with that guy. That same night the guys set off. The matter sounded quite risky, so Tanika suggested that the young man give up now if he was not confident in his abilities and continue later. But the young man was confident in his abilities. The only thing he didn't understand was how exactly they should start, where they should look, because they had almost no information. The first thought that came to the main character's party was to go to the guild to ask someone, or at least get the first clue. According to any RPG, day and night in this establishment you could hear the rattling of glasses, as well as noisy conversations. It looks like you can really find out some gossip there. The elf immediately approached the bartender and began to demand to give them the location of the black market. Watching this from the side, Qian understood why every time her forays ended in disaster. She attracted too much attention, and besides, she was offended by a stranger because he did not want to say nothing. But the bartender decided to go to the meeting. He was ready to tell about the rumors that had reached him, although the words would only come out of his mouth for money. Since the guys were broke, the guy offered another equally profitable deal. They were ready to provide the same valuable information in exchange. It was difficult for the man to refuse such cooperation, because in front of him stood a witcher and a witch, which means that their information could really cost money. The girl was ready to tell a lot. In her opinion, the information about the black market was very valuable, even if she had behaved quite strangely earlier. The bartender shared that there is a secret canal in the south of the city, but rumors are that finding the entrance to it is not an easy task. But if there is anywhere worth looking, it is in the fish store. The only problem was the number of fish shops in that direction, because which one exactly leads to the mysterious path is unknown. Although the general idea was already in the guys' heads, when they arrived at the place, they were very surprised at how much they underestimated the number of fish shops in this city. For such inaccurate information, they gave away a rather valuable item. But Chu Tian believed on the contrary. Hiding the tree in the forest seemed the most logical strategy. Looking around, the young man noticed something interesting. He said that this wisdom also has a downside. The tree needs to be watered, which means there must be a guideline. The boy approached one of the local merchants and paid generously for the fish, casually mentioning the necessary purpose. As a thank you, the man pointed to the one they needed. The person who was supposed to deliver them to the Black Market organization was indeed different from the others, but as it should have been, he was selling fish. Before trying to go directly, the young man wanted to try to get there on his own to reconnoiter the situation. Since the girl was even more useless than Notcoin, she was sent as bait. It was necessary to distract the seller so that the young man could get through. Only this was a deception plan, because after the elf, the main character, came out, he thanked the owner for such fresh and tasty fish. He planned to quickly deal with the scoundrel who had his goods and paid nothing. and in the meantime, Tanika could look around and find a way through. The first thing that caught your eye was the size of the store, because inside it was much more spacious than it seemed from the outside. Looking around, the girl saw a hatch covered with barrels. She quickly climbed into it and was right, because there was a ladder there. The room under the store was incredibly large. Not even the Baron's castle was nearby, and in the boxes nearby there were many weapons and armor. In addition to the huge assortment, there were people walking not far ahead. Tanika didn't know if they were buyers or organizers, so she decided not to show herself again. The two seemed to be sorting things out after another replenishment. The events held here definitely brought in a lot of money. When the silhouettes finally began to move away, the elf slowly left the shelter and headed in that direction until she could find the necessary decoration. One of the rooms was securely locked with a steel lock. Something like that could stop an ordinary person or a witcher, but not a magician. This time the girl was very lucky because there was no special spell cast on the vault, which would cause alarm when trying to cast magic on the lock or doors. The thing that the unknown people were talking about was right in the chest in front of her. She wanted to quickly check its contents and continue searching for the trinket. The small hole in the walls of the chest worried the girl a little, because in this case the cargo inside needed to be fed with fresh air. The plan was soon revealed. Someone saw the elf go inside, while the main character himself continued to gnaw on the fish. Inside, Tanika was waiting for a much more dangerous enemy than the two who caught the boy at the top. This evil spirit was as strong as Mordekaiser. Noticing the energy that came out of the monster's body, the girl quickly realized that this was actually the defense of the treasury, because he would kill anyone who tried to steal anything. The seller was extremely disappointed with the chosen approach, because if the beauty did not take care of protective measures, the demon, invulnerable to all influences, would simply devour her. Then the young man asked if the fisherman had immunity. He did not immediately understand the meaning. But when the guy sent him flying, the question turned out to be more than logical. Mages have always found it difficult to fight in close combat, so the main character hurried to enter the black market to come to the rescue of his friend. The demon easily broke through the sorceress's magical shields, even though she was considered strong enough to destroy an entire army on her own. But before the monster caused any damage to Tanika, the young man managed to chain him in his chains. This force was enough to temporarily hold the creature. Qian's strength was running out. His spiritual energy was depleted extremely quickly, and he would not be able to maintain the spell for a long time. Then the ice sorceress decided to intervene. Using her skills, she managed to greatly slow down the monster and then lock the doors. They did not plan to fight the demon, so the collective council decided to flee to the city as soon as possible, and then beyond its borders. The guy began to actively attack the monster. Doing it from the outside turned out to be much easier, but even though he helped the elf dodge this time, the last battle left a mark. Her ribs were broken and other parts of her body were also badly damaged. In addition, right now the monster was launching a huge block of stone towards them. It turned out to be too difficult to dodge the blow, so the main character and Tanika scattered in different directions, and the contents of the bottle that was in the girl's hands spilled. Suddenly, all the people around began to feel much better. This effect also affected Qian and his girlfriend. Their bodies began to heal quickly. The effect that the boy felt was similar to the one he experienced during spiritual practices in his home world. Then the beauty spoke about the value of this liquid. They called it the blood of fishermen or the blood of fish people. This dark elixir is one of the most valuable in the whole world. Previously, fish people were ordinary inhabitants of this world, but when information about the value of their blood was received, the entire clan was practically killed. Even if the strength that the guy received because of the potion is not enough for a full recovery, it is definitely enough to defeat this monster from the Star Rangers. The protagonist's plan was quite simple. He wanted to attack first, opening the opportunity for the sorceress to deal a crushing blow to the enemy. Even though the blood of the fishmen restored some of the energy, the young man could not use it completely for battle, so his right hook turned out to be rather weak. Due to the replenishment of strength, the young man was unable to correctly calculate the force of the jump, so he simply crashed his head into the monster. The demon laughed greatly at this, but they managed to realize the original idea. Nevertheless, the young man deliberately distracted the monster in order to send him a special explosive gift inside. Tanika also joined in next. Her spells required a huge amount of mana, but she didn't want to hold back, so she hit with all her might. Phoenix went after the pyrotechnic device. Their combination was supposed to destroy the monster right from the inside, and they succeeded. The power of this explosion was so high that not even a single trace remained of the demon, and the fish seller was completely defeated. Soon after this fight, the squad returned to base. This vial would have been enough to buy ingredients for as many as 100 or 200 of these rituals. But nevertheless, the young man had to collect all three things before they could turn him into a real imba of this world. Carl was now a key character in their plan. The guy was sure that the old witcher could be trusted. We are taken to the man himself. He fulfilled the order with distinction. As the main character asked, helping the woman and child was an important goal. Almost all the witches of the Round Table helped Qian in his transformation, even those who usually do not take part in such situations. Italy Neuter was able to get information about the albino banshee particle. It was not an easy task, but it meant that they only had to get information about two things. The red-haired beauty Talisa could not cope alone, so Tanika will help her this time, and the main character will have to go in search of the monster alone. But before the young man had time to leave their hideout, a new accompaniment was found. One of the remaining 8 witches decided to accompany Qian in his search. They moved to a northern city called Allende. Surprisingly, the streets looked deserted. After moving, the guy smelled blood. There were about 40 people dead. The young man couldn't wait to see who they would have to deal with this time. Before they entered into battle, the boy wanted to find out if their enemy had any special features, but thinking about it, the girl only remembered a special light near her eyes. The first thing that came to Qian's mind was the human form of Kitsune. Because these foxes were similar in their manner of action, they also lured people and killed them. The trail of blood stayed in the air perfectly. The young man didn't even have to use his skills to find the monster. The girl with white hair was in one of the houses. The girl said that she and her family were seriously injured, so even though the witchers were the enemies of the monsters, she had no one to ask for help except the main character. It was hard to believe because usually it was the monsters who killed everyone, but this time the girl speaks of her innocence. The witch barely believed in it. It looks like the banshee really tried to look like an ordinary person. She was even wearing makeup, but the mascara was running a lot under her eyes. The young man wanted to know how they could help the girl, because she was really faced with a difficult situation, if everything that was told to her was true. The banshee could not repay the help in any way, because she had nothing. But she said something about a cure before losing consciousness. Observing everything from the side, the witch suggested simply cutting out her tongue and then heading back to the fortress to work on other ingredients. However, such an approach was not correct for the young man, so he could not leave the girl in this position alone, and besides, there was some piece of paper in her hand. The inscriptions on this piece of paper looked as incomprehensible as those symbols on the enchantment table that every player saw. So the young man handed the package to the one who specialized in this. But at first glance, determining what exactly was written was also a difficult task for the girl. She wanted to study the paper more carefully. Only they were quickly interrupted. The same lion, part of which was also needed for the ritual, was nearby and decided to attack when he considered the moment successful. It was this monster that emitted the smell of murder. It seems that the girl did not lie, and it was not she who killed 40 people, but this monster. This manticore looked very formidable. The young man was not confident of victory, because he still did not feel particularly good. Thanks to their dexterity and the help of an experienced witch, they managed to quickly neutralize the lion. He was definitely trying to catch a fish, using a weaker monster as bait. Looking around, the guys noticed something strange. The layout of this building looked different from those they had previously visited. In addition, the presence of different practices and such dangerous creatures here spoke of only one thing. This place was someone's secret base. The group was so engrossed in collecting loot that they did not notice another monster that was lurking and waiting for the moment even more than the lion. When the main character and his girlfriend finally paid attention to the enemy, it was already too late. The huge spider had already managed to hit the beauty. The situation was critical, because the young man would not be able to fully fight with the wounded man behind him, and the witch's condition was gradually deteriorating. The girl still wanted to try to implement one spell. For this, she asked to give the found leaf to her. The main character decided to trust his partner, then the girl used a strange spell that collected energy from the space around them. The technique used absorbed the monster's blow, and then added it to the overall power, allowing Qian to deal a decisive blow to the demonic spider. The timing of the appearance of the monsters greatly worried the guy, because rivals appeared too often, and they definitely would not have been able to cope with a couple of them at once. They had no choice but to take her fragment from the banshee. Nevertheless, they avenged her family, and it is unlikely that she would be against such a reward. Upon returning to the collection site, the main character was notified that all the reagents were ready. Some of them had to be purchased for a lot of money. Even though the girl had previously helped get everything she needed, she was against the ritual. The likelihood of survival was too low, and the guy was far from a pawn on this chessboard. But the young man had already decided everything, so first of all it was necessary to turn all the ingredients into one healing mixture, which the guy would later drink. Soon Carl returned. He was also ready to help, because as he had said earlier, the appearance of a new witcher for hunters is a new addition to the family. Children who pass the test of herbs have a much greater chance of survival, which is why to become a witcher, you need to train from a very young age. But gaining a new power could be the key to returning the previous one. Danielle was now too much for any of them, so such measures were necessary. Carl warned his Kohai that physical strength would not be enough to contain such unbridled energy. The guy should at least pray. The sorceresses watched what was happening from the side and supported the spell, even if the process only gradually increased the pain. From the very start, the guy was sure that an alien would hatch from him. Since the internet did not yet exist at that time, it was extremely interesting for several of the sorceresses to see the results of the young man's special techniques live. After a few minutes, the reaction was finally completed. Chu Qian's blurred silhouette could be seen in the clouds of smoke. His appearance could be transformed due to the action of the herbs. Before the updated version of the youth rose, it was impossible to say for sure whether the ritual was successful or not. If it was a failure, they would have to kill the main character. Meanwhile, the sorceresses continued to try to protect one of the settlements. The red-haired beauty and her friend together maintained a barrier around the city for many hours. Right before the most serious attack of the entire defense, the girls' mana finally ran out. They were ready to face the end, even if they did everything possible to win. A stone ball the size of the entire tower was flying straight at them. In their condition, there was no chance of avoiding the attack at all. Then the main character intervened in the matter. Now he looked a little different, but the Kodunya quickly recognized him, and the Witcher easily cut the block into small pieces. The situation was extremely unusual, because there were no sources of magical energy in the area, so it was not possible to resist the enemies. The girls were very worried, because they were confronted by a truly powerful wizard, but Qian was positive, because with his new abilities he could easily deal with everyone. It was not necessary to wait long to show new abilities. The next attack with dark energy was easily repelled. The young man quickly noticed a strange thing. The radiation always came from one place, so surrounding himself with a barrier of positive energy, he decided to test his guess. Going down the stairs and overcoming many corridors, the group still managed to get to the right place at the right moment. An incredible amount of negative spiritual energy emanated from the farthest corner. It was like real poison for living beings. But thanks to the ritual he had experienced, now it was not difficult for Chu Qian to cope with such a threat even alone. The sorceresses were happy, because their almighty friend was finally able to harness even more power than before. Now their affairs should go like clockwork. As soon as the guys weakened their defense for a moment, the dark energy returned again. This time its amount was even higher than during the previous attack. Despite the similarity of mana, a completely different spell was used. Despite their experience and strength, the sorceresses could not say exactly which one. The only one who was able to react immediately was the main character. He did not care what technique would be used. He was preparing to resist anything. He launched his 10 blades directly at the circle of magic, but they bounced off him as if it were a barrier created by Bartholomew. Streams of mana from the spell reacted to Qian's technique, sending out several particularly strong volleys, but the girl managed to defend herself through joint efforts. Deciding to try to destroy the circle of transformation, the guy concentrated his power in one blade and struck right at the center of the seal. From the contact of forces, lightning began to strike in all directions. But a figure in a white cloak appeared behind him. The stranger did not plan to do any favors to the guy, so he wanted to strike from the blind spot. Being in a disadvantageous position, the main character still managed to notice the attack. With his reaction in our world, he could become the best Formula One pilot. This man was the one who ordered Danielle to strike and take away the protagonist's powers earlier. He did not plan to answer the questions. Thanks to the strength of the young man, as well as the studies that this man conducted, he considered himself the only one worthy of calling himself a god in this world. Since in this manhwa, the villain and the protagonist are not going to make cliched mistakes, the bad guy wanted to immediately get rid of those who could potentially become a threat in the future. Once again convinced of the correctness of the decision made, the main character put up a barrier, repelling numerous attacks from his opponent. Quickly adapting to the changed rules of the game, the girls used combat spells hoping to quickly end the battle and go celebrate their success. Only it was not possible to hit the man. His speed was so high that Tanika did not even have time to notice how the villain was behind her. However, even though the Grey Eminence surpassed the others several times, he was not the only one capable of fighting with the same efficiency. Surprise helped the young man throw his opponent back. The ice mage was saved, but the shadow hardly showed at least half of its strength. Compared to the main antagonist, the main character, who was the 32nd heir, was a real kid. His clan may have been powerful, but they lacked experience. The man was confident of victory, because the most powerful magic in their world were the spells of the 5 elements. Once upon a time, inspired by this idea, Luc Besson made his film. His abilities were the embodiment of chaos, reflected by the singing elements, and it was not possible to defeat him without comparable strength. Although Qian could not use such power alone, but thanks to his faithful friends, they could artificially repeat this symbiosis. Despite all the preparation on the part of the protagonist's party, their opponent only released a certain amount of destructive mana. Their strengths became equal for some time, until the buff from Tanika and Talisa ended. After one blow, the main character and his opponent flew in different directions. But thanks to his speed, the man was able to deliver another attack, grabbing Qian's head. He knew about the young man's strength, but even so, no one could defeat him. The technique of 10 blades, which in this form made it possible to inflict serious injuries on those who are closest to God in this world, helped to discourage belief in such nonsense. The damage caused was enough to drive the shadow out of their city. It was not possible to finish him off, but now the young man's condition was no less serious. To prepare for a serious battle, the 10 sorceresses continued to take part in various events to gain the trust of the people. When Jessica finished the show, she planned to head back to base, but one of the locals offered to take her since he had a carriage. The guy's name was Alexa Arend. He was definitely interested in the company of a witch, but unfortunately for him, witches hang out for the most part only with witchers and magicians. Moreover, there was no need for this, because the place that the girl needed was very close to this palace. She hid in one of the previously prepared houses, where she was frightened by the main character who appeared out of nowhere. Now he could separate his body and soul. She was interested in how the battle for the city of Fenolda ended, but there was nothing special to tell the guy about. He only shared the results. Jessica wondered how her sisters coped. Then Qian said that they helped him, and after being injured, they took care of him and restored his mana. The way the guy simply exposed himself to serious attacks made the girl a little angry, because he was too careless and could make their efforts to initiate him pointless. To greet his girlfriend, the guy moved only his soul. His body remained in the same room where the witches were. The guy's body strongly resembled the ghost of Casper, so Jessica began to make fun of him and pass through the empty shell. The girl also asked if the main character managed to get information regarding the incident with the albino banshee. It was difficult to imagine what exactly they were planning to do in the end, but most likely something terrible was up to them. After thinking a little, Chen suggested that their main enemy was planning to use the monsters as an army. Most likely he was looking for a way to control them. Having learned more about the shadow, Jessica asked to entrust the information to her, because thanks to all these noble techniques, they had ears all over the country. Accepting the witch's offer, he thanked her for her hard work, and then dissolved like a marshmallow in a mug of coffee. Waking up in his body, the young man did not notice either Talia or Tanika. He decided to go out in search of them, because this was not like their usual behavior. As soon as the main character took a step outside the doors, someone tried to attack him from behind, but the new ability reflected all the weak damage inflicted. The attacker turned out to be some girl. The blow ricocheted at her, which is why the little girl could not stand on her feet and fell. Wanting to help the stranger, the young man asked if she needed anything, and also apologized for the incident with the air barrier. The girl did not want to answer the questions, but only attacked Chu Qian over and over again, striking herself without even touching the young man's body. As it turned out, 2 outstanding witches decided to go to the restroom together, leaving him unattended. As a result, an attempt was made on his life, and he wanted the girl to be ashamed. The guy didn't know why, but the baby attacked him and due to damage reversal ended up knocking herself out. The sorceresses suggested waiting for the girl to wake up from sleep, and then asking her about the motive for the crime because they didn't even know each other. However, the baby had not slept for a long time. The main character asked her how long the demonstration of acting skills would continue, but the answer was only silence. Thalia tried to dissuade the girl from such stubborn resistance, because they were not her enemies, so she had to trust and share her story. Noticing doubts in the little girl's eyes, Tanika asked to tell her, otherwise they simply would not be able to help her. A few minutes of silence later, the girl finally decided to share what she had previously experienced because of a man who looked like the main character. Returning to her house as usual, the little girl ran to her mother to see her. But instead of a loving smile, she saw a terrible picture, and the nobles ordered her murder. No matter how much the baby called her mother, she did not answer. Worrying that she had done something wrong somewhere, the girl asked for forgiveness, but there was no reaction. A second later, her relative decided to attack the girl. She was saved from death by some guy who pulled her out from under the blow.